I'm Tom Natchu. Welcome to another episode of Fraud Squad. Now, we all know fraudsters can do some pretty reprehensible things to make a quick buck. You're not going to believe the depths to which this group of fraudsters went. In this story, we'll see how one cemetery director took advantage of grieving families who were only looking to bury their loved ones. This callous con lacks any compassion for either the living or the dead.
Now we have people who are stealing money from a cemetery and digging up deceased people and throwing them in the back.
That little moment of greed for that little bit of money has affected thousands of lives.
I went to the cemetery maybe 50 or 60 times looking for my family.
It was so horrible back there. It was bones sticking up out of the ground. Human bones, right on the surface.
Burr Oak Cemetery has a significant and historical importance to the African American community. The cemetery was started in 1927 at the concerns of African American leadership that there was no cemetery available to them that was not segregated at the end of their lives. There are several individuals buried there. Ezra Charles, the boxer, is buried there. The members of the Negro League, they're buried there. Individuals like Dinah Washington. The one that you hear about the most is Emmett Till. Emmett Till was the catalyst that started the civil rights movement. The story goes that he whistled at a white woman down in Alabama as he was leaving the store. He went down there for the summer and he never returned alive. If we took the time to walk down the roads of Burr Oak and reflect on that history there and record it as we walk, we will find that there's a complete history book there.
In addition to its more celebrated deceased members of Burr Oak Cemetery, several other notable members of the African American community are buried there, including individuals who lived through a period of slavery. This was no doubt a piece of historical importance.
I have a baby, Shantae Godfrey, that's buried there. And I also have a father, Robert L. Gaddis, who was buried there also. She was born with a heart disease. She was born with tetralogy of Fallot. It's a disease where your heart is backwards. February 16th, she had a seizure. We rushed her to the hospital, and she never recovered. She was buried in Babyland. Babyland is a part of the cemetery where it's nothing but babies buried there, all babies.
In 2003, the new owners of the cemetery, a company called Perpetua Incorporated, hired a cemetery manager named Miss Carolyn Towns. What her employer did not know about her was that she was about to commit a fraud against them and their customers that would go undetected for several years. Ms. Towns came up with a sinister plot to make some cash, and a lot of it.
I'm so sorry about the loss of your husband. I'll try and make this as easy for you as possible, okay? We discussed over the phone. These are the different options that you have, but I have a particular spot that would be great for you, okay?
Oh, okay.
Okay? I'll do everything under $2,000.
Thank you so much.
She convinced her groundskeepers to dig up old graves to make room for new ones.
There's a reason why I'm here and you over there, son. We got it now.
One by one, they disinterred the graves and loaded them onto their truck. They would move them to the back part of the cemetery where old foliage, excess earth, and refuse was disposed of. This area of cemeteries is known as the spoils. For several years to come, Miss Town and her accomplices would reuse this plot. Burr Oak Cemetery would later become known as a mass grave for hundreds of discarded coffins and bodies. Is a casket required for a direct cremation? Yes or no? Before the break, we asked, is a casket required for a direct cremation? Yes or no? Well, the answer is no. Caskets are not required for a direct cremation, and funeral home personnel should inform you of this. Unscrupulous funeral home operators may sell a family a casket when it's simply not needed. Suspicious of the bookkeeping, Marvin, a representative of Perpetua Inc., was sent to the Burr Oaks office in Cooks County to investigate. He determined that there were serious discrepancies showing that revenue did not match the burials.
Have a seat. Have a seat.
Is everything okay?
You know, I've been going through the books and there's a lot of money missing. And I have to hold you accountable. I'm gonna have to let you go. You know, I have to call the police in on this until we get this thing cleared up.
Martin reviewed the books and figured out that Mrs. Towns was stealing money.
You gotta come see this.
After firing Mrs. Towns, Marvin found that fraud and the missing money wasn't his biggest problem.
Sheriff Dart, this is Marvin over at the Burr Oak Cemetery. I need you to get over here right away. You've got a problem.
4 people have been arrested by the Cook County Sheriff's Police in connection with a scheme that preyed on mourners at Burr Oak Cemetery in Alsop, Illinois.
Take the remains from that grave and dump them in an area in the back part of the cemetery.
But when I came back and I was walking across the field, I could see that, you know, there was a piece of bone, a piece of a casket, a piece of cement liner all the way across the spoil area. And I immediately said to myself, someone's digging up deceased people and dumping them in the back of the cemetery.
And the examination of the grounds, within seconds showed us human remains that were laying scattered throughout.
When I first heard the news on Burr Oaks, when it first broke out on television, it's like I knew.
The number that was originally given out was about 300 graves were dug up. 300 is a lot of people. And when you have a loved one that's possibly buried there, automatically you think, well, maybe mine is one of those 300. Then it turned to 300 to 500, then it turned to maybe 1,000. And so when you got numbers like that, immediately the community is going to be incensed.
This is evil. I can't understand how someone could disturb the dead.
I went straight to the cemetery and I heard that the people there that I was seeing as I was going there all those years was arrested.
We had people coming from all over the United States because their loved ones were buried at Burr Oak to find out if possible there was some disturbance with their graves. At one time, that was the only cemetery that would inter African Americans, period. So everybody either knew someone or had family members there. And so the massive, emotions of crying and people feeling lost and angry, that whole emotion was so bad.
The suspects in the case would remove contents from the grave, including human remains. They would bring them to a spoil area like this. And then when the piles become so numerous, they would use the backhoe to spread the remains and other grave materials across so they were flat. So in other words, we didn't find intact bodies. They were kind of spread along the spoil areas. Or they would dig holes, deep holes, and push the spoil piles into the hole and then cover them. So that's why we were finding remains all the way across the spoil areas and below the surface.
I went to the cemetery maybe 50 or 60 times. looking for my family. And no one could ever tell me anything that was where they were. We're gonna locate them, we're gonna find them. I never received a word on how to locate any of them.
When you buy a cemetery plot, is it yours forever? Yes or no? Before the break, we asked, when you buy a burial plot, is it yours forever? Yes or no? Well, the answer is no. Some cemetery plots are sold for a specific number of years, and there may be other sales conditions as well. Make sure you know what you're purchasing before you buy. Check the small print.
We had a whole lot of anger to the point of wanting to fight. Wanted to know if there were any of the employees of the cemeteries that were still there, because they wanted to hurt them. If the sheriff wasn't there, if the sheriff employees weren't there, it would have definitely been a riot.
Primarily, it would either be the double stacking within one grave, or it would be the removal of the grave contents, grave materials containing a deceased human being.
Without any real rhyme or reason, there would be different times where they would use a truck to either push all the piles down, or they'd use a bucket to sort of flatten them down themselves. All of that behavior making it very difficult to later identify people.
To see something of this magnitude, to touch a city the way it is so strange that it all comes from fraud and greed. Fraud and greed. And it's not acceptable.
Police investigators found several different frauds had taken place at Burr Oak.
This wasn't a quick 1 day or 2 day investigation. This was about 3 to 4 months. I mean, things were so bad here. When we initially came out here, I thought that there was going to be elements of this that were going to be straightforward, not easy, but straightforward. One of them was, I thought, certainly one of the easier things we were going to have occur here was finding out who's buried where and how many people are buried here. Just basic questions.
Take your men, cordon off this area, crime scene A, and you take another group, cordon off area B.
I, as God is my witness, assumed that there was a number to a state agency or maybe even a county agency that just tracked the burials. A very simple process. Who would imagine we don't? We don't.
From here all the way to this tree line up here, there was remains found everywhere. And we still, to this day, I was out here 2 weeks ago, and Jason and I found I don't know if it was a femur or it was a leg bone of some nature. We found one. Usually after a good rain, a lot more of the bones come to the surface.
Part of the motive of some of these individuals was that they felt that the cemetery was getting close to being filled and that they were going to be out of a job, and that the job paid very well for them. And this activity of desecrating graves and exhuming bodies further extended the life of the cemetery. So for that, it worked for them.
We arrested Carolyn Towns. She was the director of the cemetery. We arrested Maurice Daly, who was the backhoe operator. We arrested Keith Nix, who was the cemetery foreman, and his brother, Terrence Nix, who was the dump truck operator. The defendants in this case were charged with 8 felony counts, one being dismembering a human body, desecration of human remains, desecration of a grave, theft over $100,000, theft over $100,000 from a place of worship, removal of markers or headstones from a cemetery grounds, those types of charges. Carolyn Towns pled guilty to a sentence of 12 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. And the other 3 defendants in the case are still going through the court process.
Carolyn Towns is in jail, but I still feel like she got an easy sentence. Her family knows where she's at. They know what she's doing. There's so many other families out there that still haven't found their loved ones because of her. All she can do is serve her term in jail. That's not going to satisfy everyone.
frustrated by the lack of help, Khalees turned to Pastor Steve Jones to help find her baby and father at Burr Oak.
When we were on the grounds at Burr Oak, Khalees came to me and she asked me about Babyland, because one of the stories that broke was that there was no more Babyland, that all of the headstones were removed, and the sheriff's office did find headstones that were piled up in an area. She asked me would I help her find her child, and her child was in Babyland. So we went back where we walked the grounds and I was with her, and there was no markers, there were no headstones, so we couldn't find it. Then she said, well, could you help me find my father? We went over that area. That area was somewhat disturbed, the same thing.
Khalees and Pastor Steve could not find any markers to tell Khalees at the time where they were. Khalees started the long process of trying to find her baby and her father.
I've been waiting 2 years and no one ever called me. I would email, I would call, and I'd just be put on the list again for them to locate my daughter and my father. Then Reverend Jones called me, and he wanted to know did I find my loved ones, and I told him no. And he said that he was gonna make it necessary for him to go back to the cemetery, and he was gonna try to locate them, or at least tell me if they're there or they're not there.
Khalees and Pastor Jones continued their efforts and decided to bring in some heavy machinery to help search underground.
And he called me back and told me that they found my dad first. And then he went over to Babyland, and when he came back, he said that they found her also.
Some cemeteries will bury one coffin on top of the other in order to make better use of space. True or false? Before the break, we asked, some cemeteries will bury coffins one on top of another in order to make better use of space. True or false? Well, the answer is true. Some cemeteries will bury one coffin on top of another to conserve space. This is called double depth burial. The cemetery should tell you if they plan to do this.
It's been very devastating to the African American community in this area. But beyond that, it's also rocked the cemetery industry as a whole.
After this event occurred, we got a lot of inquiries from different people about the magnitude of what occurred, how it was allowed to occur. The one thing that I think people found out almost as a rule was that the cemetery industry around the country is just not very well regulated at all. There may be a couple of places where it's well regulated, but we didn't find too many of those.
To do something on that level, you can't have a respect for remains, loved ones that have passed on. You can't have a respect for the dignity of cemeteries, being a cemeterian, of the investment that families make in purchasing coffins and the whole process. You can't have a respect for that at all and just blatantly disinter a body and resell it to someone else for that little money. I always get asked the question, what do you think God has to say about this? Well, I could truly say God shed the first tear at that tragedy.
Now, we want to hear from you, so Fraud Squad takes it to the streets to hear some of your stories.
When they say that they're with Enbridge or something like that, and just that they're there to make sure that your furnace is running efficiently and your hot water tank, but they always tell you need it replaced, but they're really with a different company, and they usually have a uniform on and stuff like that, but I never let them, because who comes door to door? Like, anyone who comes door to door, no, don't do it. Like, it doesn't make sense, right? Like, they'll contact you by phone or something and make sure it really is your company. Otherwise, I would never trust anyone who comes to my door. Don't even answer the door.
But you have to be so careful. And especially with things like rentals or anything where you're giving a deposit, you've got to do your research. If someone gives you a contact number, find personal recommendations who've dealt with them in the past. Check contact numbers you've been given before you travel anywhere. Do every single piece of research you can. And it's not going to guarantee it, but if it does happen, you at least know you've done everything you can on your end.
experience came with a travel agency from Calgary, which offered some great Florida experience, tourist experience. And unfortunately, it was so true. You call them back to verify the telephone number. You call them back to get the order number, all information, everything. It's a very sophisticated way. They work on 3 levels, so they actually have telephone operators who answer the calls and everything. If you call within a week or 2 weeks to verify, they will still be there and picking up your calls. So they will send you confirmation number. They will email you all the information, the tourist package, everything, and you never hear from them again. You know, it takes about a month, and they pull the strings for a month, and they totally disappear, and suddenly the number is gone.
Well, we've come to the end of another episode of Fraud Squad. Remember, we're fighting fraud together.